The coming of the Scourge. Dawn breaks slowly over the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire. It should have been a peaceful hour, the quiet moment before military drills begin, a time when the sun lifts itself over distant hills and lights the watchtowers with soft gold. But on this morning, something is wrong. The soldier on duty hears a sound long before he sees the source of it. At first, he thinks it is thunder, distant and muffled, rolling across the wide plains. Yet the sky above him is cloudless. No storm is coming. The air is still. Then the tremor reaches his feet. The ground begins to vibrate lightly, then violently, as though a god beneath the earth has awakened. His grip tightens around his spear as his heartbeat begins to echo the rhythm of that deep, terrible sound. A realization crawls into his mind like ice. It isn't thunder, it is hooves. Thousands of them. Every Roman garrison on the frontier has heard the rumors. Commanders reassure soldiers that the tales are exaggerations meant to frighten recruits. But every man knows that some stories are repeated not because they are lies, but because they are true. Stories of warriors who drink the blood of their enemies. Stories of a warlord who eats from wooden plates while the gold of conquered cities melts in his fires. Stories of a people so alien in appearance that even hardened legionaries feel a shiver when describing them. And then the soldier sees them crest the rise. An entire horizon filled with riders, faces unlike any he has ever imagined. Their skulls are elongated and stretched unnaturally, shaped deliberately into cones by the binding of infant heads. Their eyes look hard and wild, empty of fear and overflowing with a kind of ancient cruelty that seems not of this world. They are the Huns. At their centre rides a man who, at first glance, appears almost disappointingly ordinary. He is not a giant. He does not glitter with jewels like an Eastern king, yet something in his gaze makes the soldier recoil involuntarily. It is a look that strips away pretenses, a look that knows secrets, a look that promises only death. This is Attila the Hun, the man who would soon become a living symbol of the apocalypse, a figure the Romans would call Flagellum Dei, the Scourge of God. In a matter of minutes, the soldier's world will end. But the story of Attila begins long before this moment, in a collapsing empire and a rising tide of terror emanating from beyond the boundaries of the civilized world. To understand why the Romans trembled at the thunder of hooves, one must understand the force that produced them, a world of nomads, a world of psychological warfare, and a world awakening to the rise of a man whose reputation would outlive empires. To grasp the terror Attila inspired, one must first understand the world that produced him, a world the Romans neither comprehended nor wanted to comprehend. For centuries, the Roman Empire had imagined itself the center of civilization, a fortress of marble, law, and order. Its borders on maps looked enormous, stable, eternal. Yet beneath this facade, cracks had begun to spread. By the year 406 AD, the empire was weakening like an old monument whose foundations had rotted. Germanic tribes pushed across the Rhine in waves the Romans could no longer repel. Corruption was so widespread that honest governance seemed like a quaint relic of the past. The economy bled resources. Armies were overextended. Morale eroded. And beyond the eastern horizon, beyond Roman knowledge, beyond their imagination, the Huns were gathering. The Romans reacted to them with a mixture of fascination and horror. Unlike the settled peoples Rome was accustomed to conquering, the Huns were nomads to an extreme degree. They were born on horseback, lived on horseback, and died on horseback. Some Roman writers even claimed they could barely walk after a lifetime in the saddle. Their methods of survival and war seemed monstrous to Roman sensibilities, They placed raw meat beneath their saddles, letting the friction and heat of the horse tenderize it during long rides. By nightfall, they would eat it half raw and still warm. They spoke in harsh, guttural tones that Latin ears struggled to interpret. Then there was the skull shaping. Hunnic parents bound the skulls of infants with tight straps so that, as the children grew, their heads lengthened. The result was a conical, alien shape that seemed engineered to unsettle anyone who saw them. Roman soldiers often described their first encounter with the Huns as meeting demons from another world, and the Huns encouraged this belief. Psychological warfare began long before their arrows flew, but physical strangeness alone didn't make the Huns terrifying. It was their unpredictability. Roman warfare was built on discipline and formation. Soldiers trained to fight in lines, shields locked, ranks coordinated. The Huns fought differently. They swarmed, they surrounded, they attacked from afar, loosing arrows from powerful composite bows that could pierce armor at distances Roman legions had never faced. They faked retreats, only to whirl back in ambush. They appeared and vanished like smoke across the plains. Into this world of chaos, in the same year the Rhine frontier collapsed, Attila was born. He inherited not only the ferocity of his people, but a genius for strategy and fear. Rome did not yet know his name, but soon they would learn it and never forget it. As the Eastern Roman Empire watched its borders tremble, the Huns themselves underwent a transformation, one shaped by ambition, calculation, and a quiet act of murder that altered history. In 434 AD, the previous leader of the Huns died, and power passed jointly to two brothers, Attila and Bleda. For more than a decade, they ruled together, launching coordinated campaigns against the Eastern Romans and extracting enormous annual payments of gold. Rome viewed tribute as a pragmatic alternative to war, but the very act of paying it fed the growing myth of Hunnic invincibility. Yet beneath this partnership, a darker truth simmered. Attila did not want shared authority. He did not want compromise. He did not want counsel. He wanted absolute power, power so complete that when the word Hun was spoken, only one face would come to mind. Around 445 AD, Bleda died. The historical record, usually so quick to detail battles and triumphs, becomes suspiciously silent. No wounds are described, no illness is mentioned, no heroic death appears in chronicles. He is simply gone. Most historians agree Attila murdered his own brother, whether by poison slipped quietly into wine, a staged hunting accident, or strangulation under cover of night. The method is lost. The result, however, is unmistakable. With Bleda gone, Attila emerged as the sole ruler of the Hunnic world. But Attila's true brilliance lay not merely in eliminating rivals, it lay in shaping perception. In 448 AD, the Roman historian Priscus visited Attila's court and described a spectacle unlike anything Rome had ever seen. At a grand banquet, kings, nobles, chieftains, and Roman envoys sat at tables overflowing with wealth. They ate from plates of gold and silver, drank from jeweled goblets, and adorned themselves with fine fabrics and gemstones taken from conquered territories. And Attila? He sat at the head of the table eating simple meat off a wooden plate. He drank from a plain wooden cup. His clothes were clean but utterly unadorned. He neither laughed nor celebrated. He simply watched. It was a masterclass in power. He showed every leader in that hall, Roman or barbarian, that wealth meant nothing to him, that he needed no ornament to command fear, that he was the unmoving center around which all others revolved. His silence was more terrifying than any threat. Priscus and others who met Attila described a man unremarkable in stature, yet unnerving in presence. Broad-chested, large-headed, narrow-eyed, thin-bearded, physically plain, almost forgettable. But his eyes were something else entirely. Witnesses wrote that Attila had a way of staring into a person, as though reading every lie, every fear, every weakness buried inside them. He ruled not only through armies, but through the psychology of domination, and the world was about to learn what such a man would do when challenged. The Eastern Roman Empire believed it had found a stable solution to the Hunnic threat: gold. For years, Constantinople paid enormous sums to Attila, thousands of pounds, hoping to buy peace and avoid war. It was a familiar Roman tactic, one they had used with many tribes. But the Huns were not merely raiders seeking loot. Under Attila, they became a force with a singular purpose: to instill fear deeper than any blade could cut. In 441 AD, the Eastern Empire made a fatal mistake. They missed a payment. Attila did not respond with negotiation. He did not send diplomats. He did not ask for explanation. He unleashed devastation. His armies swept across the Balkans like a plague. They moved rapidly, unpredictably, attacking not for plunder, but for the psychological destruction that followed. The city of Naissus, birthplace of Emperor Constantine, became one of the first victims. When Attila's forces breached the walls, they carried out his signature command: total annihilation. This was not war, it was erasure. Contemporary accounts describe horrors almost impossible to imagine. Civilians slaughtered, buildings burned, wells poisoned, animals destroyed. Years later, Roman envoys passing through the region reported that the stench of death remained so strong they could not approach the ruins. Bones still littered the riverbanks. Naissus had become a scar on the earth, a warning carved in ash and bone. And Naissus was only the beginning. More than 70 cities faced the same fate: Serdica, Philippopolis, Arcadiopolis, each one systematically wiped out. The Eastern Empire, bleeding territory and gold, was forced into a humiliating treaty in 443 AD. Tribute was tripled. A demilitarized zone was established south of the Danube. Rome agreed to return any Hun who defected, while Huns could harbour Roman defectors freely. The message was unmistakable. Rome was no longer negotiating from strength, it was bending. But Attila was not finished. In 447 AD, he returned again, driving deeper into Roman territory, farther than any barbarian force had gone since the time of the Spartans. His armies reached Thermopylae, the legendary pass where 300 Spartans once halted the Persian advance. The symbolism was devastating. The guardians of civilization were now the ones in retreat. Across the Eastern Empire, Christian communities began to whisper a terrifying interpretation. This was not a mere conqueror. This was not human vengeance. It was divine punishment for the sins of mankind. They gave him a name that would echo through centuries: Flagellum Dei, the Scourge of God. And Attila embraced it. He understood that if people feared him as an instrument of divine wrath, resistance would crumble long before his armies arrived. It was the ultimate psychological weapon, and Attila wielded it with precision. By 450 AD, the Eastern Empire was drained, humiliated, and broken, and Attila turned his gaze west. As the Eastern Roman Empire staggered under the weight of humiliation and loss, the West faced a crisis of its own, one that began not on the battlefield, but in the private despair of a Roman princess. Her name was Justa Grata Honoria, sister to the Western Emperor Valentinian III, and her life had become a gilded prison. Caught in an affair with her chamberlain, Honoria faced harsh punishment, her brother arranged a forced marriage with a dull, uninfluential senator, a union meant not for love, but to keep her under control. Desperate and furious, Honoria made a decision that would reshape the fate of empires. She secretly sent her ring and a plea for help to the most dangerous man in the world, Attila the Hun. She wanted rescue. Attila wanted opportunity. He declared that Honoria's letter was a marriage proposal, and that as his bride, she was entitled to half of the Western Roman Empire as her dowry. This claim was absurd, and everyone knew it, including Attila. But absurdity did not matter. It gave him justification. When Valentinian III refused the marriage, Attila mobilized the largest army he had ever assembled. Ancient sources exaggerated the numbers. Some claimed 500,000, but modern historians estimate 100,000, 200,000, still an immense, unprecedented force. In 451 AD, the Huns crossed the Rhine into Gaul. City after city fell like wheat before a scythe. Metz was burned to the ground, reportedly on Easter Sunday. Reims collapsed. Strasbourg collapsed. No fortress, no garrison, no river crossing seemed capable of stopping them. Rome appeared doomed. But salvation came from an unlikely alliance. The Roman general Aetius, who had once lived among the Huns as a hostage and understood their tactics, forged a coalition with the Visigoths. Enemies by tradition, Rome and the Goths now faced a threat that endangered both. Their armies met Attila at the Catalonian plains. What followed was one of the most savage battles in ancient history. Estimates vary wildly: 165,000 dead, 300,000 dead, 50,000 dead, each number horrific in its own right. But all accounts agree. The battlefield became a whirlpool of chaos. Men fought in tangled masses. Horses crushed the dying. Blood soaked the earth thick as mud. The Visigothic king, Theodoric I, fell amid the carnage, trampled beneath hooves. As night descended, both sides were shattered. Attila withdrew into his camp, preparing for a final stand. According to legend, he built a funeral pyre of saddles, vowing to throw himself onto it rather than be captured alive. But the decisive Roman attack never came. Aetius, strategist, survivor, and political realist, held back. Destroying Attila completely might empower the Visigoths more than Rome. A weakened Attila, still dangerous but diminished, served Roman interests better. Thus, the battle ended in a strategic defeat for Attila, the first of his career. His aura of invincibility cracked, his pride burned, and pride is the wound that makes a predator most dangerous. The next year, Attila would return not to Gaul, but to Italy itself. In 452 AD, still wounded in pride from his setback in Gaul, Attila turned his fury south toward Italy. This invasion was different, not a campaign of opportunity, but one of personal vengeance. He intended not merely to conquer, but to punish. His first major target was the wealthy, heavily fortified city of Aquileia, one of the jewels of the Western Empire. Its walls were thick, its defenses were strong. Its citizens believed the city could resist indefinitely. For 3 long months, the siege dragged on, the defenders confident the Huns would eventually give up. Then Attila noticed something strange. While observing the city from a distance, he saw storks lifting from the towers, abandoning their nests and flying away with their young. To the Romans, this meant nothing. To Attila, it was an omen nature itself, fleeing before his wrath. He ordered one final assault with every warrior he had. This time, the walls fell. What happened next was not a sack. It was a deletion. Attila issued the same command he had used in the east. Erase it. Hunnic soldiers swept through Aquileia with mechanical precision. Men were slaughtered. Women and children were enslaved or killed. Buildings were dismantled stone by stone. Wells were fouled. Even rubble was scattered, so no trace of the city remained. When the Huns were finished, Aquileia no longer existed, not as ruins, not as a burned outline, but as nothing. For centuries afterward, travellers crossing the region could not even tell a city had once stood there. The survivors who escaped fled into the Adriatic marshes, wading through mud and reeds until they found clusters of small islands. There they drove wooden stakes into the lagoon floor and built homes elevated above the water. They believed horsemen could never reach them, and they were right. From trauma, terror, and the desperate search for safety, a new settlement grew, a settlement that would one day become Venice. But Attila's campaign did not end with Aquileia. Padua fell. Verona fell. Milan fell. Northern Italy became a trail of destruction, smoke, and despair. The Western Emperor Valentinian III, powerless and terrified, fled from Ravenna to Rome. The Senate gathered and realized the horrifying truth. Rome had no army strong enough to defend the capital. Panic spread through the city. Temples filled with frantic prayers. Rumors buzzed that Attila would burn Rome to ash, just as he had done to Aquileia. With no military hope left, the Senate made a desperate choice. They sent a small delegation to negotiate with Attila, not led by a general or a statesman, but by Pope Leo I. The two men met near the Mincio River. No records survive of their conversation, no transcript, no witness's testimony. Yet somehow, impossibly, Attila turned back. Christian legend later claimed that Saints Peter and Paul appeared in the sky behind the Pope, threatening divine punishment if Attila advanced further. Historians, however, note practical reasons: disease ravaging Hunnic camps, famine due to Italy's poor harvest, and urgent news that the Eastern Romans were attacking Hun territory across the Danube. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Rome was spared, but Attila's legend as the Scourge of God only grew stronger. Attila never returned to Italy. In truth, he would never again lead a campaign of such scale. For though Rome had been spared, the Huns' unstoppable momentum had begun to fade, and behind the scenes, the end of the Scourge of God approached with unsettling speed. In 453 AD, at the age of 47, Attila celebrated yet another marriage, a political union with a young woman named Ildiko. Among steppe peoples, it was common for powerful warlords to take multiple wives to cement alliances. That night, a lavish feast was held in Attila's camp. He ate heavily, drank deeply, and revelled with the confidence of a man who believed himself chosen by destiny. Eventually, he retired to his chamber with his new bride. By dawn, something was wrong. Attila, always an early riser, had not emerged. His attendants called out his name. No answer. They knocked. Silence. Finally, fearing the worst, they forced the door open. Inside, they found Ildiko trembling in terror, and Attila lying lifeless in a pool of his own blood. The official explanation spread quickly. Attila had suffered a massive nosebleed during the night. Too drunk to awaken, he choked on his own blood and died. It was an anticlimactic end for the man who had brought empires to their knees. Too ordinary, too small, too human. So naturally, rumours spread. Some believed Ildiko was an assassin sent by the Romans. Others whispered that a rival poisoned him. But there is no evidence. Only the eerie fact that the most feared warrior of the age died quietly, helplessly, in his sleep. The reaction of his warriors was anything but quiet. According to the historian Jordanes, the Huns performed a brutal mourning ritual. They cut their own faces with swords, letting blood stream down their cheeks, so that the greatest of warriors would be honored not with the tears of women, but with the blood of men. The mourning turned into a massive funeral festival called a strava, a storm of drinking, chanting, and violent celebration of Attila's life. Then came the burial. Attila's body was placed inside a triple coffin, one of gold, one of silver, one of iron, symbolizing the wealth he had taken from the civilizations he crushed. According to legend, the Huns diverted a river, buried the coffin in its dry bed, then released the waters. To preserve the secret, every slave who worked on the burial was executed. To this day, Attila's grave has never been found. Without his unifying force, the Hunnic Empire began to disintegrate almost immediately. His sons divided the realm, weakening it. Subject tribes rose in rebellion. In 454 AD, at the Battle of Nedao, his son Elac was killed, and the coalition Attila had forged collapsed. Within a year, the empire had vanished from the world. Yet Attila himself did not vanish. Though he built no lasting monuments, created no enduring government, and founded no dynasty, his impact radiated through history. His devastation of cities weakened Rome's infrastructure. His enormous tributes drained Rome's treasury. The refugee waves fleeing his armies destabilized borders. When the Western Roman Empire finally fell in 476 AD, just 23 years after Attila's death, his shadow loomed unmistakably over the ruins. More than conquest, Attila perfected something darker: fear as a weapon. He understood that terror could do what armies alone could not, that the idea of Attila could strike harder than the man himself, and in that sense he achieved a legacy more enduring than stone. 15 centuries later, his name remains synonymous with destruction, a reminder of how fragile civilization truly is, how quickly order can collapse into chaos, and how one ruthless human being can shake the foundations of the world